Well, yesterday we spent a lot of time applying and learning and being in an environment that usually scientists are. We're, cutting pieces and looking at a specific thing, how it behaves, discussing specific factors, how they affect the growth of mushrooms, etc. This is very valuable, very, very valuable way of method, basically, of seeing things. That's closer to the scientific way and has a lot of value and has helped us advance in many things, science as we call it. But, anybody knows what science means? Nobody? Never heard of science before? Yes? Knowledge from the Latin, scientia. It's funny, until a couple of centuries ago, everything in Europe, in the Western world, scientific was written in Latin, even if nobody spoke it, but for some reason they were writing the scientific stuff in Latin. To go one step back and understand, I'm doing that in order to understand what science is doing and how we'll try to step away a little bit from that today. Again, I'm not devaluing science. I'm just saying the way Western science has been operating, it has been missing some things. So, scientia, the Latin, and that reflects a lot on how people were seeing, this civilization has been seeing things, comes from this verb. It's Sanskrit schism. You know the word schism? Separation, splitting. Exactly. So science, for a very long time, has been trying to separate and split things into smaller and smaller things to understand how they work. Because there is this idea that if you understand the small things and then you put them together, like the sum of the small things will be the total picture. So basically when you have an ecosystem, you have trees and you have mushrooms and they're somehow connected, and then you have other plants and you have animals, etc. So let's say here in a scientific way, we're splitting the mushroom from everything else. We're taking it, and then we're taking the mushroom and we're splitting it as well, opening it up. We're looking at its cells, and then we're looking at its nucleus, and then from that we're looking at one specific molecule, let's say, what it does and how it behaves, etc., etc. And then we look at one specific atom, and then we look at the subatomic particles, and then we think that if we have understood these, then we understand what it does. That's useful for some things, but it's very misleading for many other things. So especially when we see complex systems like the ecosystem, it can really take us completely off tangent, completely. And seeing something functioning in the lab in a petri dish, which is extremely useful, but seeing it functioning in a specific way, we say, okay, that's what it does in nature. And then we go to nature, and it's a totally different story. So today, we'll try to just take a step back and change a little bit our perspective. Again, it's just an hour and a half. It could be days-long kind of activity, but we'll just try to change a little bit our perspective. So, this is an image that many people probably have seen it here, the succession. Just try to imagine how Earth used to be a few billion years ago, which was lava, water, and rocks. Okay, and now we look at the forest and something has happened in between to reach that. So this is the primary succession, as we call it, like going from bare rock, something is happening to actually build soil, plants are coming, etc., and we end up with a luscious forest. So the first as we're talking with Manthos. Where's Manthos? Oh, there you are. We're talking about lichens. One of the first colonizers of bare rock is lichens, which they're teaming up cyanobacteria with algae and fungi. They actually team up because they're doing different jobs. The cyanobacteria, they can photosynthesize, so they can get carbon. The fungi can actually mine and break down the rock to get other minerals. They're exchanging them, and slowly, bit by bit, they are breaking down, creating what we call sand or clay or silt, and then slowly small, annual, very short-lived plants. There are plants that have a cycle, like from the moment that you seed them to the moment that they actually seed themselves. It can take just a few weeks. So these are the plants that are the pioneers. They're coming in very harsh conditions, and they're able to start growing, grow really fast, seed, and reproduce. These are the ones that are creating the first organic matter. They're building up soil. Afterwards, more plants that are taking longer because they have more resources now. So some grasses and perennials, but they're usually small ones because they don't have enough resources to grow big. And these ones are breaking up more soil and creating more organic matter. And then you go to grasses, shrubs, and some things are growing. So some other things can grow underneath that don't have so much light. So there are more shade-tolerant plants later on. Has anyone seen this picture before? Yes. And what do you have at the end usually?
Forest.
Yeah, what forest?
Perennial
forest. I hope it's perennial forest.
Biodiverse forest.
Okay. It's just that some people, they say that at the end, the climax community, as we call it, at the end when it's, yeah?
And there is also the conception that at the end it's stable.
Yes, I will get into that right after.
While it's not.
It can never be stable. But there is a climax stage where most people say it's the conifers because they have more fungal associations, etc., etc. And it does happen, but depending where. It does happen in Siberia. The climax is conifers. If you go to the Amazon, the climax is not conifers. So this is a generalization. But there is a climax stage where everything has grown as big as possible. There is a lot of diversity. There is a lot of soil that has been built up. Over here, you see, deep soil. But in some other situations, it could be oak or hickory or other broad leaves, etc. But it really depends on your climate. It really depends on your zone. It depends on the actual rock, the bedrock, because depending on the bedrock, you have different species that can be supported or can develop faster. So climax is the maximum, let's say, you can reach. But, as Theodoros said, it's not stable. There is disturbance coming. What kind of disturbances can you think of? Huh? Fire is one. Humans is another one. Lately, the most common one, the last century.
Lack of space or nutrients?
There is no lack of space of nutrients. That's the thing, because we've been building up nutrients. We've been, and there are always, as it develops, as ecosystems develop, you create more space actually. It might sound counterintuitive, but you create more niches because then for life. And then a tree can become a space, extra space for life. And then something can grow on it, a vine. And then on that, another aerial root plant can survive, another parasitic plant can survive, etc., etc. So you create more space, even if it doesn't look like it. And you create more nutrients as well, and we'll talk about how we do that. But other disturbances you can think of? Storms. Storms, actually I've seen entires in Canada, forests for kilometers, completely flattened from a storm. Flattened completely, yeah.
Earthquakes?
earthquakes as well can actually open up, split, create landslides, and destroy forests. There is a lot. What? Yeah. A comet is a very big disturbance. Hopefully, fortunately, it doesn't happen very often, but it's a huge disturbance. Yes.
Temperature change.
Temperature changes because of periodic changes of the climate, which are very long, but it does happen. Actually, what we call now old growth forests, everybody understands this? Old growth forest, which there are really few left on the planet, unfortunately. They started after the last glacial age, because glaciers actually really destroyed everything. They flattened everything. And then they started emerging. They started emerging actually from bare rock, almost. And then we ended up at the last. But yes, the point is, what we're trying to say, is that there are disturbances. And that's okay, as long as we are not, as humans, now we've been disturbing too much, and so it doesn't have time to regenerate. But when you have a disturbance, you're not losing all your soil, you're not starting with bare rock, unless you're humans and you go remove and you accelerate the death spiral towards going back to the bare rock. But what I'm trying to say here is that there is always hope. We started with bare rock, now we have desertified humans and eroded huge parts of this planet, but it can go back. And we can accelerate this process. We don't have to wait for billions of years. But so far, this does not happen, of course, in succession one after the other. They happen in parallel. So from the bare rock decreases, the mosses and grasses are increasing. At the same time, the grass and perennials are coming up, mosses and grasses go down, and then at the same time, woody pioneers are starting to come up. So, they're basically happening in parallel, but with a delay in a phase. This is what's happening above the ground. That's what we can usually see. But something very magical is happening underground. And it doesn't happen because of what's happening above ground. And at the other side, what happens underground doesn't happen. What's happening above ground doesn't happen because of what's happening underground. They happen in conjunction, and they're in collaboration. So yesterday and the first day, we saw that fungi, for example, need what in order to survive? Emily talked about it as well, about the fungal needs. Tina talked about it, I talked about it. What do they need in order to thrive?
Energy.
I cannot hear you.
Energy.
Energy, everybody needs energy. What kind of, what food? Carbon. They need more carbon. And what else? Moisture. They need moisture. And bare rock cannot hold a lot of moisture, of course, right? So in the beginning, when there is bare rock or desertified or deteriorated land, you cannot have a lot of fungus growing. Of course, you can have the lichens, but not these mycelial networks that we saw. You mostly, I don't know if you can see actually here, you can read, but you mostly have cyanobacteria and actinomycetes. They're just, if you don't know them, just some kinds of things that can survive in really hostile environments. And then you have saprophytic bacteria when the grasses have started growing, and then you can have some organic matter, a little bit, but it's mostly bacteria. They can survive everywhere. As you go ahead and you continue, you have bigger plants, perennials, brushes, and bushes, and smaller trees. Then bit by bit, more fungi can survive because they're fed by the plants. The plants are feeding the ground. And there, you can have some arbuscular mycorrhiza, as we'll see in a lot more detail what they are. But for now, keep in mind they are fungi that actually associate with the plants, and they're fed by the plants. And of course, they're doing them a favor because they're giving them a lot of stuff as well. We'll get into that. But you see, as this one is evolving on top, the thing underneath is evolving together. And they're helping each other going forward, becoming more luscious, more biodiverse, and the same thing is happening underground. It's becoming a lot more biodiverse, and you have a lot more fungi, more and more and more. Just to get an idea, in this kind of stage, the ratio of mass between bacteria and fungi can be 10 to 1. 10 times more, not in number, I'm talking about mass, biomass. Bacteria to fungi, 10 to 1. Over here, in the middle of the succession, you can have 1 to 1. This is actually where it's suitable, not only, but it's more suitable for our vegetable gardens. Our vegetable gardens are, if you see it in the succession of ecosystems, are not in the bare rock, are not in the old-growth forest. If you go grow broccoli inside the forest, you won't eat much. So you want it to be somewhere here, where you have equal amounts of fungal life and of bacterial life. But as you grow farther and farther and farther, and you have an old-growth forest, you go to 1,000 to 10,000 even to 1. You have so much more fungal life in your soil. And actually, if you go to an old-growth forest and dig, you will see mycelium running everywhere. So this is the most advanced, in the succession sense, kind of ecosystem you can have. It is the most resilient, it is the most productive, it is the most life-giving kind of ecosystem. Over there, this is what happens in nature, but we can become part of it. And what you have in the end, over here, it can be a planned forest, actually. It can be a planned forest that is productive and very, very food-producing kind of ecosystem for humans. It might not look like an old-growth forest, but it can give a lot of food, and it becomes more sustainable. You had a question?
You meant that, yeah, planted forest can have these kind of connections between the trees, like in...
Yeah, but the planned forest, I would say. Planted in the traditional way that many, if you see these monocultures that do in northern countries especially, where they go and have one species for hundreds of kilometers, no. You'd have to help it and plan it more. So, why do we want a more fungal dominant soil? Is it because they look good? That's because, old growth forests, we feel that it's a beautiful ecosystem. And we'll see it from an ecological point of view and a human point of view as well. Why is it better for us? So, first, because whatever we plant in such a soil will have a much more enhanced nutrient uptake. It means that they can take nutrients from the soil in a very efficient way, and this is happening in conjunction with the mycorrhiza, we said. Mycorrhiza, myco is fungi in Greek, rhiza is root in Greek, so it's like fungi that grow on roots. That's what mycorrhiza mean. They allow them to exchange nutrients with their host plants. So the plants are giving them down what the fungi cannot access, which is sugars that they're created with photosynthesis, and the fungi access everything else and they give it to the plant. Micronutrients, water even, phosphorus, nitrogen, a lot of minerals, etc. They're very efficient. We saw yesterday and the day before, and on the documentary, if you watched it the other day, that the surface area of the mycelium, the mycelia in plural, is gigantic. So they can access nutrients from a much, much, much greater area that the plants would not be able to. So they create basically an extended network of roots for the plants, so they get their nutrients much more efficiently. So your overall crop productivity is increasing dramatically. Improved soil structure. The fungi can actually, with this network of hyphae that they're creating inside the soil, they create much better structure. Not only that, they also specifically excrete glomalin, which is a substance that sticks, let's say, it's like a glue that makes the particles of soil stick together. And this way, why is that good? Because you have much better porosity. Imagine you have little tubes, millions of little tubes going through the soil. It creates much better porosity, which helps aeration. It has much better water holding capacity, and it's less prone to erosion. Because if this glue is holding the particles together, it cannot erode as easily. And to compaction as well. Imagine having little tubes again and pores, so the compaction becomes like a sponge, the soil. So it's much, much more resistant to compaction. And I think it's pretty obvious why compaction is not great. You've seen a parking lot, nothing grows there. You've seen a pathway where people walk on, nothing grows there, because a compacted soil cannot support so much life. Another reason why we want a fungal dominant soil is disease suppression. Many people associate fungi with disease. Both, like that's the first thing they think of very often. You tell them about fungi and they say, oh, either on humans or in nature, they think it's disease. It's the exact opposite, actually. The more diversity of fungi you have, the less disease you're going to have. And it's through many different mechanisms, many different mechanisms. We're just starting to discover. We'll talk about it more in the mycorrhiza section, the next session. But we're just starting to discover these amazing mechanisms that they have in order to actually protect the plants and themselves and the ecosystem and bring it back to balance. So one of the ways, which was the only way we thought that they used to function, is competing with pathogenic microorganisms. They occupy more space, and this way the pathogens cannot, exist over there. They get more resources for themselves, so the pathogens are not able to live. But they are also producing antimicrobial compounds. As we saw in the medicinal mushrooms in the introduction, it was very short, but we saw that they're producing a lot of antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, antifungal compounds to protect themselves, but their hosts as well. We very recently thought that they were doing that just to protect themselves, and just because they were close to someone, they were also protecting their body. But now we know, we have seen a lot of examples where fungi actually, they produce specifically antimicrobial substances just for the plant. They produce it and give it to the plant to protect itself, even if they have no direct benefit from that. So the fungal dominated soils can help reduce the incidence of many plant diseases, and this way you eliminate the need for chemical pesticides, of course, and all these kinds of destructive chemicals. Another reason is carbon sequestration. Actually, the plants, we say, they sequester the carbon, right? But big part of it goes underground. Actually, in northern climates more, many plants can end up having up to 30% of the sugars that they produce. They give it to the mycorrhiza that they associate with. 30%. Imagine, from all the food you're producing, 30% goes down to your friends who are helping you out in your roots. It's a huge amount. Apart from that, in many ecosystems, we have seen now that 35 to even to 50% in some ecosystems of all the carbon that is captured by the plants is actually sequestered by the fungi. So in a world where, maybe it's not the time now to talk about climate change and what is the effect of that, but where we need to sequester more carbon, having fungal soils is really changing, it's a game changer. It's creating a sink down there, that is capturing the carbon, and it's capturing it for a long time. I see sometimes lately there are many crazy technologies great technologies that they say they can sequester carbon. And the funny thing is that they spend energy actually in order to sequester carbon, which is completely insane. And nature has done this for billions of years. We don't really need the machine to capture carbon. The plants are doing it, and they're giving it to the fungi to actually hold it over there forever almost. So apart from that, the next thing is support for biodiversity. And when we say biodiversity, we don't only mean more fungi, but we mean that the more fungi you have, the more plants you're going to have. There are many plants, many. Orchids are one of them, one of these groups of plants. There are, I think, 22,000 species of orchids. It's the biggest group of plants. And all of them would not be able, all of the orchids, 22,000 species, and that's just an example, they would not be able to survive without fungi. They survive just because of fungi. We'll talk more about this amazing group of plants, but the fact, if you are spraying, in other words, if you spray antifungal chemicals in your soil, you just cannot grow a lot of plants. It's not that they won't be as happy like some plants, but they just cannot exist. So you encourage a lot of biodiversity. And by having more plants, then you can have more insects, you can have more kinds of bacteria, you can have more animals that are eating these insects. So because of the fungi, which are one of the bases of life on this earth, you can have thriving ecosystem of many, many other kinds of species. Another reason why we would like to have a fungal-dominated soil is to eliminate the need for inorganic inputs. Yorgo said before, as the forest grows, one would think that you'd have less resources, but the exact opposite is happening. As we said in the beginning, the fungi, the mycorrhizal networks, they help trap nutrients in the soil, so they cannot leach, both acting as filters, but also because they eat them and take them inside their bodies, and they're actually immobilizing them, but also because they mine for them. So with the organic acids that they're producing, they're actually breaking down small pieces of rock, and they are able to absorb nutrients from there. So they make them available, not only to them, but to all other forms of life. So you're enhancing the nutrient content of your soil. And you're holding them. One of the biggest reasons of losing nutrients from a soil is actually over-irrigating. It's one of the biggest problems in agriculture, over-irrigation. People are using way too much water. And rainfall. If you don't have these fungal networks, all these nutrients, because many of them are salts, especially the inorganic ones, will just go along with the water and leave from your soil. Fungi can actually support that, they can hold them over there. And they will, this way, you don't have the need for any inorganic inputs, because most soils on this planet, most of them, have everything that is necessary for life to thrive. It doesn't mean that they are available, these nutrients, but they can become available mostly through fungi. And the last thing, and it's not the last, there are many other reasons, I just try to keep it short, is ecosystem resilience. If you have fungal-dominated soils, they contribute to the resilience of the whole ecosystem. They actually stabilize the soil, they enhance the plant vigor, they grow much faster, they are more resistant to disease, they improve the ability of ecosystems to withstand stresses. As I mentioned yesterday, and I will mention it a few more times today, in the desert, all of the plants that can survive in the desert, they are heavily mycorrhizal. It means they have many, many associations. It means they would not be able to survive in the desert without mycorrhiza. So the resilience of many ecosystems depends entirely, in some cases, on the fungi. If they didn't exist, we wouldn't have an ecosystem there. It would be dead land completely. So we have many reasons to actually try and create a fungal dominant soil. Many, many reasons. But how do we do it? Again, here there are many ways to do it. We'll try to go through them. As I said in the beginning, this could be a 15-day seminar only on that, trying to compact it and give some ideas, inspiration, so you can go search farther, we can discuss it farther. There are many, many tools. And here we'll just present very briefly a few of them. I'll just try to make a parallel so things can stick to you better. Emily talked about the 5 fungal needs, and in a context mostly of cultivation of fungi. Cultivation, indoors, outdoors, but concentrating on the fungi. So here we'll draw a parallel of these 5 fungal needs and see how we can satisfy these needs in the ecosystem, in our plot of land, let's say. So, first thing, good water. That's, for me, especially in our climates, in our ecosystems, it's the biggest thing. It's the biggest problem that we have, not because of lack of water, of very bad management of water. Actually, Greece, specifically Greece, has, if I'm not mistaken, it has more than 20% of the fresh water of all the Mediterranean countries. We have a lot of water. We just manage it in the worst possible way. 50% of the water is lost in leaks in the water network. The agricultural production is using 89% of the fresh water, and 90% of the farmers are overwatering. It's really, really, really bad. So, first thing, for good water, for good soil, you need good water. And for good water, you need good water management. There are many, many ways to do that. Again, only this little section could be a 15-day seminar and a lifelong pursuit. But I'll just give a few ideas just to see that how simple it can be sometimes. You don't need huge schemes. Sometimes small interventions can make a huge difference. So, fungi, when they're growing, they like field capacity, which means that it's at its maximum. It's not waterlogged, but it's at its maximum that it can hold the soil. And to do that, of course, you need to capture all the water that you can. How do you do it? Many different ways, just some examples. Boomerangs or half moons is what I recommend people to do in any sloped land. And when I say sloped, I don't mean mountain like cliff. I mean any sloped land, the water will actually find a way to go down. Even a few degrees, it will leave. So try to hold it. Try to hold it there. In permaculture, we say 3 things that you have to do for water management. Slow it down, sink it, meaning slow it down, it means to make it move as slow as possible. For example, do you know what the speed of water is when it goes down, like on the surface of soil? Can you guess? Well, it's a few meters, it's a few centimeters per second. Okay, it can be 1 meter if it's bare land, it can be a few meters per second. You know what the speed of water is when it's inside the soil? It can be a few centimeters. If it's a good soil, it can be a few centimeters per day. It can be a few centimeters per month if it's full of organic matter, because there is gravity, right? It's pulling it down. But it can be a few centimeters per month if it's full of organic matter and it's balanced properly. So, slowing it down, that's what it means. You slow it down. And then you spread it. You spread it as much as possible. If you see it in the bare land, and in the beautiful roads of the Greek countryside that are all, I don't know if when you came from Green a few days ago, did you notice that in many spots on the road, on the asphalt, it was full of sediment, full of rocks? It's because like a couple of weeks ago, you had heavy rain, and the water found its path, the fast path, because there are very badly designed roads, and it took all this organic matter and sediment with it. We want to avoid all that. So we have to spread it and slow it down. Spreading it means you do kind of earthworks that make the water go in the maximum amount of places possible. You don't put it in a canal and you accelerate it like modern hydrologists, civil engineers are doing. You do the exact opposite. And the last thing that you do is to sink it. Don't allow it to leave. You're spreading it, you're slowing it out, allow it to sink inside the soil, because this is the biggest reservoir of water. The soil is the biggest reservoir of fresh water. It's not the lakes, it's not my water tank, it is the actual soil. The water holding capacity of the soil is thousands of times bigger than all the lakes and all the rivers together. So, a few things you can do. Boomerangs, for the ones who we're not familiar with that, I'll just make very, very small example. And just to get the connection again with why we're talking about that, in my olive grove, for example, one of the first things that I did was to make boomerangs. What are boomerangs? You have your tree here, and the slope is that way, and you just go dig a small ditch, bringing the soil from the ditch downwards. So you have, let's say, something like that. And you have a ditch. So when water comes down, it's going to concentrate over here. Not only water though, the erosion, the organic matter that has eroded from the top will go and stop over here. And it's a good idea to actually go and plant some things or seed some things on this little berm. So you can have plants over here with the roots are going to hold it there, and everything that comes is going to stop here. Interestingly, in my land, when I did this, and I started, of course, putting a lot of organic matter, etc., the first mushrooms that came up was the Agaricus species. They're saprobiotes, saprophytic. They grew inside the boomerangs, inside the half moons, because they were full of organic matter and a lot more wet than anything else in the land. Once, like even days after everything else was dry, this zone here stayed wet. So they're like a very simple thing that helps your trees, helps your ecosystem, and directly also helps fungi. Another thing you can do is swales. Does everybody know what swales are? Yes?
Well, on the boomerangs.
Yes.
Do you have experience with just putting organic matter, like in the places where it's difficult to
Yes.
this way?
Yes, absolutely. I've tried this way as well. That really depends on your context and your slope. So if it's very slopey, it's better to add some, because I mean the organic matter, it can erode itself. You create a boomerang with little branches and organic matter, but it can also, if it's really heavy, the rain, and in my land, I mean, because it's in a watershed, there was really a sheet of water coming down, this can be taken away. So if you're in a small slope and you're not having very heavy rains, it works very well. You can even make swales with that. It will stop some of the rain. But again, it depends on your context. So everybody knows what swales are?
No.
Okay, just very quickly again, I don't want to get into many details, but because they're very valuable tools, and just getting the idea of what it is, then you can go learn more about it. We can discuss, or you can research it online or in books. And just to give you a very quick idea of what it is. So a swale is a ditch that is actually dug. Okay, let's make a topographic map of. It's not topographic map. It's not from the top. It is a hill here. Okay, so contour. Everybody knows what a contour is. Contour is basically a line that is at the same altitude. So here in this mountain, this is a line that is, every point of this line is at the same altitude. This is another line almost. They have to be parallel. This is another line, and this is another line. So now try to imagine that you're flying over that. What do you see? Here, you would see that, because this line goes around the mountain, right? It goes around the mountain. So from the top, you would see that. Here, you would see that. That goes around the mountain too. Here, another line. So this is a contour map. It just tells you which ones are the lines that are in the same altitude. Okay, so what? So why is that useful? Imagine digging a ditch here. You have a small ditch, avlaki, and it's over there. And I come in with a bucket and I start pouring water in it. What's going to happen? It will fill the whole thing. It will spread. It's like it's a container that goes around the mountain. So if I pour water at one spot, it's going, because it has the same level, it's going to fill the whole entire ditch around it. So the point is here that in some places, water might run a lot more. Like we say in a bare land, the water will find the shortest path, which is not the shortest path, but it will find a path and it will be concentrated at one point. And water might be coming here like crazy. So instead of letting it leave, it will fall inside the ditch. And from this ditch, it's going to go everywhere around the mountain. So you're spreading it and, of course, slowing it down. So in other words, a swale is a ditch on contour so that when water comes in, it spreads around and it infiltrates in a much larger area. Are we clear with that? So that's a very, very easy. I'm not going to tell you how you do that. It's very simple, but we can discuss it afterwards. But it's a very easy way to actually slow down, spread, and sink the water. You don't do it in all cases. Don't do it in all cases. You do it in, that's not a good example because it's a very high slope, but usually, just to make it obvious, I did that. You do it in smaller slopes, okay? And in different kinds of conditions. Anyway, very technical, forget about it. Just keep in mind the swale. Search it and do it in your lands and things really will change. Another place where fungal life is coming up, the first couple of years it was coming up mainly in the boomerangs and on my swales. And not only fungal life, all kinds of life is becoming really a focal point of life there. A lot more water, a lot more organic matter, a lot more fungi. So to summarize, I won't get deeper into that, but to get the idea, maximize the water path, minimize the water speed. These are the things you should remember in managing your land concerning water. And if you try to always have this perspective and forget the swales, forget the boomerangs, you can come up with a lot of other ways probably. But if you keep this mantra, maximize the water path, minimize the water speed, you will be doing the right job. Another way to actually hold more water is to add organic matter. This way you increase the water holding capacity of soil. It's been calculated that, not calculated, calculations are very wrong because they were calculating a very different thing, but from actual experiments all over the world, for every 1% increase in organic matter, you're increasing the water holding capacity of your soil for 1.5 to 2%. It might sound small, but it makes a huge difference. How you're increasing your organic matter? Many ways. You can bring in manure from your neighbors. You can bring in the olive leaves from the olive press, but you can also produce it yourself because organic matter is mainly produced by plants. The more you plant, the more organic matter you're going to have. And there are ways like the syntropic farming way of planning. It's just a tool, a great method, very efficient. One of them, there are many. But this is one of the most efficient ones of creating more organic matter for your land. We will, at the end of this session, if we have time, we'll have a 15 minutes, just an introduction, it's a teaser, but just to get an idea how this can be used in order to increase your organic matter, which is good for everything, but mostly for fungi, for fungal life. So how do you do that? Very, very simply. More plants, chop and drop. You chop them all the time in specific periods of time, specific moments, but anyway, you cut them and you create more organic matter. You prune and you wood chip all the time, and this stays on your soil and it creates more and more organic matter. Good water, healthy diet. Healthy diet. The main nutrients that fungi need is carbon and nitrogen. Carbon mainly. Actually, their bodies consist of about 50 to 70 carbon atoms to one nitrogen atom. To compare it with the bacteria that actually are between 5 and 10 carbon atoms to one nitrogen. Protozoa are about 20 carbon atoms to one nitrogen. It shows that we are what we eat. So when we are a lot of carbons and little nitrogen, means we have to eat a lot of carbon. Bacteria are less carbon compared to nitrogen, so they need a lot more nitrogen. So give them carbon. Give them carbon and complex carbon as well, mostly, and they'll be happy. So depending on the quantities, it's just 1 to 2% nitrogen that they need. But they also need phosphorus, they need potassium, they need magnesium. They need good food in order to thrive and grow well. Wood chips are very rich in many nutrients, especially the ramial. Ramial means from the branches, from small new branches. These are packed with nutrients. These are the ones you want to be pruning and cutting and wood chipping in order to make wood chips for your fungi. In 2 days, we will be cultivating mushrooms and today in our compost, we'll put a lot of wood chips that they love them. Again, we come back to the organic matter. For a healthy diet, you need organic matter. Syntropic farming is one of the ways. Just a reminder, you'll see it many times in the next few slides. Fungi need, as we said, more complex carbon and higher ratio. So you don't give them a lot of manure, for example. If you want to encourage fungi, you don't go there and give it manure. Manure has a lot of nitrogen, especially like chicken, pork, rabbit manure, they have a lot of nitrogen. There won't be many fungi growing there. You want to give them more wood, more carbon. Go up a bit. So, yeah, the fungal dominated compost we'll be doing this afternoon. And you'll see how you can make compost that is specific to help the fungal species thrive instead of the bacterial and other forms of life. It's a whole other session, maybe world, talking about the food web and what are the associations between all these species, because again, fungi cannot exist by themselves. We're talking about fungal dominant soil, we're not talking about fungal only soil. Fungi need other species and other kingdoms in order to survive. But they just become the dominant species. It doesn't mean because you're dominant, you don't need the others. You need them, but in smaller quantities. Another thing they need, you want to say something?
Question. Does that apply both to wood-loving and dung-loving species of fungi?
Okay. In general, this is a general statement. As I said, what they have inside their bodies is mostly carbons, like 50 to 100 to 1 nitrogen. So the dung-loving species that are much fewer actually, they like more nitrogen. They need more nitrogen than the ones growing on a piece of wood, of course. But still, this is a lot less what they need than bacteria, for example. So in general, to encourage them, if you want to have psilocybin or coprinus things growing, for example, you need to give them more nitrogen. But still, as a general rule, they need a lot more carbon than most other forms of life. Okay. So another thing they need is warmth. Yesterday we talked a lot about incubation and that they love being between like 20 to 28 degrees, depending on the species, but they need warmth. They don't like warmth, not heat, okay? They don't really like heat. They don't really like cold either. They're mesophilic, which means that they love, meso, it's middle, philic, I love, so they love the middle. That's why, for example, we've talked about thermophilic compost, the one that you turn all the time and you break your back, but then you have compost really fast in a couple of weeks. They don't like that, both because you turn it and because you break their hypha all the time as you're turning it, and because it's too hot. It can get 60, 65 degrees in there. They don't like that at all. They die. Most of them die there. So if you want to encourage fungal soil, you don't go too hot and you don't go too cold. Too hot, another thing, very, very important to remember, that concerns climate change, it concerns our living as well. You know the difference when you have a day of 30 degrees, an average warm summer day in Greece. If you go on cement in downtown Athens, do you know what the temperature of the asphalt can be?
A lot.
How? More than 60, even more than 60. When you go to bare land, it's soil, okay, but it's bare. There is no plants there. You know what the temperature can be? 45 to 50. And if you go to well, organic matter, mulched and planted land, the temperature can be 20 degrees. So why 20 degrees? Because this is where they're going to grow. So atmospheric temperature can be extremely different from the temperature of the soil, or of the asphalt, or of the cement. And then we say that humans do not change the climate. Of course they change the climate. If you strip a big piece of land of its trees and you fill it up with cement, we're not talking about only the temperature. It changes completely. If you increase the temperature by 30, 40 degrees in an area, you have a completely different climate.
Do we know if the behavior temperature-wise is the same on the other side of the spectrum, so the cold temperatures, does the cement hold more?
Does the?
Cement hold more in comparison with the soil and the organic dominated soil?
So if the cement, when we have cold, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it has a big thermal mass, so it will take more time to cool down. But if you are in cold conditions, it will take more time to warm up. So it stays in the extremes more. If you have soil that is alive and you have water that is also alive, then your extremes are shrinking by a lot. Why? For many reasons. First of all, because of course you are covering it with plants, and these plants are absorbing the heat and turning it into sugars instead of just absorbing it and storing it as heat. They actually use this energy to do something instead of just storing it. But another very important factor that many people don't think about is the actual biological activity in the soil. So when it's cold, answering your question, when it's cold and you have a dead soil, this very quickly will accumulate, will end up being the same temperature as the atmosphere. But if there is biological activity, like humans, okay, we can be in the -10, but our bodies are not -10 because we're burning energy. So imagine millions and millions and billions of organisms metabolizing things, exothermically metabolizing things. They're producing energy. And it might seem not counterintuitive, but very small, but they actually have a huge effect. So when the temperature drops and you have a lot of life in your soil, this can keep it higher for much, much longer, as long as there is life in it. So life regulates extremes. It's also through root respiration and through plant respiration as well, the evapotranspiration. This can it's like the way the earth is sweating. The earth is sweating through the plants. They take as we do, exactly the same way. We take water from inside that has accumulated heat, it goes on top, and then this transpires with the heat that it has taken from our bodies. Plants do exactly the same for the soil. They are the sweating of the soil. And this way you keep your temperature more balanced. The composition of organic matter is also exothermic, so it can warm up the soil in colder conditions. And of course, insulation. Insulation, literally, you can insulate your house with straw. Well, because it has a lot of air in between, and that's what is happening on the soil as well. The more organic matter you have, the more porosity you have, the more pores you have, the more insulation you have. So you insulate, no matter what happens on top, underneath you have more stable conditions.
Ask a quick question?
Yes.
I remember that there's a rule most fungi die above 30 degrees Celsius. Is that the general rule, more or less? Or is
Many do, yes. But again, so in a bare soil, it's guaranteed in Greece, it's guaranteed that you will kill most fungal life in summer. It's guaranteed unless you insulate it. And you can insulate, you can have really tens of degrees of difference if you have built your soil well, in the right manner. Yes?
So going back to a question I wrote is about when you talked about the cactuses surviving because of fungal activity. I guess then it's a very different setup than in our climates.
They're very deep.
Very deep.
They go very, very deep. Because in the desert, we've discovered mycorrhiza that associate with cacti, that they can go tens of meters deep. Because in the desert, to find water, literally there is no water for many meters. So the roots, because they're big and fleshy, they cannot go that deep. But the small, tiny hyphae of a few microns wide structures, they can really go very, very deep and search for water. So that's how they survive. So deep there, it's insulated because after a few meters, actually, it's pretty stable, the temperature. And that's how they can survive.
That's a very interesting point, I guess, for places that are getting desertified.
Mm-hmm.
To keep this in mind.
Yeah, of course. So many species, I was talking about it, I was discussing with someone yesterday, that we see forests dying now in many places, from California to Greece, dying because of lack of water. Many of these forests are planted forests. If they had mycorrhiza on them, they would be able to survive. They really increase their drought tolerance of most plants. Okay, can we continue now? Another thing is good breathing, oxygen. They need oxygen in order to survive. It must be provided so that they can grow. They need oxygen to grow. How do you do that again in the soil? You increase the porosity. Organic matter does that. Organic matter is a sponge, so it has pores. You build more organic matter. Syntropic farming comes again. It's a tool. You avoid over-irrigation. Another big problem, I say it again and again, I'll say it again afterwards. Over-irrigation is killing life. Water, especially in this kind of soils that we have plowed and compacted again and again, you over-irrigate. You see now in Thessaly, the flooding, there are places, the water is insane. The water table over there is more than 100 meters deep. In some places, 180 meters, I've been told. You have to dig 180 meters to find water. And there are spots that have flooded for weeks now, and the water is not receding. How is that possible? Well, they've made artificial ponds where you go and you compact the soil, and then the water cannot go. It's so compacted, so you have water on top, and then you have water down 100 meters deep, and it cannot go down. If you compact the soil, apart from the fact that plants cannot grow, you're also becoming more prone to flooding. Flooding is not water coming, it's water coming and has nowhere to go. That's the important thing. If it has where to go, which is the biggest reservoir is down below our feet, And if it's well, it has a good porosity, then you won't flood. Or you'll flood very, very temporarily for a few hours, maybe and then it will go down and it will feed all of the organisms there. So yes?
But why does over-irrigation, if you turn the soil, why does that avoid breathing? Because normally it makes the soil
It doesn't.
more airy and
You
more
think so.
fluffy.
The moment you do it, it happens. There are many, many reasons. First, but I'll just tell you a couple. First, you've killed most of the life there. Fungal soil, fungal life especially, you've killed it. You've exposed it to the sun and you have cut all the hyphae. It's gone. So it might look fluffy in the beginning because you have fluffy hyphae the moment you brought them up, but once they're dead, you just have bare, little, or not only fungal, but most of the microorganisms die out there. The organic matter gets oxidized very quickly. After a few weeks, you have no life, you have no organic matter, and so you're left with little clay and silt particles that will just come closer together and they will be extremely easily compacted. The tractor passes and it's a compacted cement underneath. The other reason is because the lighter particles, they become dust. So the tractor passes and then the dust comes up and then it settles and it creates a crust on top made of clay. So you have a crust made of clay that can become completely, it can close completely all the pores in the surface. So the water comes and has nowhere to go. So it might look fluffy and nice in the beginning, but you have completely killed your soil. And you have insulated it in terms of water infiltration. So plowing is really, really deadly. You know where was Eden? You know Eden?
Eden, the garden.
I mean the paradise. Where was it? You know? Huh?
In the forest.
But where? On the planet? Where? Like the?
Middle East.
In?
Egypt.
Middle East.
No?
Where in the Middle East?
The Euphrates and Tigris.
Huh?
Between the two rivers.
Which two rivers? Euphrates and Tigris. In Iraq, Mesopotamia. It was the paradise, of course, two huge rivers in plains, amazing paradise, right? Everything was luscious and growing great. Have you seen how it is right now? They have, last year, they recorded 120 days over 40 degrees. It's hell. Have you read about hell? You know, that's hell there. It's a dead land, it is sand, desert, and hell. People are boiling. They had 57, 58 degrees. It's hell. From paradise to hell. How did they do it? How did they manage?
He wasn't eating the apple after all.
What happened in Mesopotamia a few thousand years ago?
Agriculture.
Agriculture, modern agriculture. There are other types of agriculture. Agriculture. And what did they invent there, which created huge amounts of food? Plowing. They started plowing. Why? Because they were very unlucky. It's not because they're bad people. They were very unlucky because out of, if I remember correctly, 32 species of cereals that we eat, 26 exist in Mesopotamia. And cereals are perfect for this type of agriculture. They're great because their seeds are annuals and you do it again and you kill the soil again and again every single year for thousands of years. And you go from paradise to hell just by doing that. And this is what we have done. Not only there, we've been doing it for thousands of years and you see the results. We've been doing it in other places. In the United States, they managed to do it in 1 century. In the plains of the Midwest plains that used to have deep, black, rich soils of meters deep, you know about the Dust Bowl of the 30s? They managed to do it in 1 century because they were very efficient. They had tractors, not like little donkeys pulling the plow. So we're great, very efficient at destroying life. So plowing, really, if you see anyone, if you have any contact with any human being that is plowing, please educate them, beg them to stop doing this. It is the single most destructive practice that humans are doing right now on the earth. In my opinion, more than burning fossil fuels, more than dumping chemicals into the sea, more than anything. We're killing the planet this way. Sorry for the tangent. Let's go back to...
Wow.
So, where were we? Avoid over-irrigation, yes. Waterlogging. Things cannot survive. Some things can survive inside water, but usually in soil you have organisms that are supposed to survive in soil, not in water. They need humidity. They don't need to be swimming in water. They die. Plants die, fungi die, and a lot of other microorganisms die. Spread the water. Mulching. The cover crops to reduce the risk of compaction. Have you ever seen in your garden, if you ever had a garden, some spots, how it is if you don't use it and it's not covered and there are no plants, and then after a heavy rain, have you ever tried to put a little shovel in it? It's compacted. It's as if someone have stepped on it. Of course, there are thousands of droplets coming with a very high speed and hitting it again and again and again. It's compacting it. Never leave bare soil. Put something on it, even a plastic thing, anything. The best thing is to put organic matter. Like plants are just decelerators, you know, they're there, opening up, protecting the soil, the rain comes, they go down, and you know, they fill up. Have you ever shaken a tree after a rain? It's raining again, because it has held all this water and has decelerated it. So it comes down very slowly. Little plants, big plants, always cover your soil. This way, you will help fungi grow in your soil. So, another thing, if you already have compacted soil, some people, they advocate for plowing. They say, okay, just do it once. But, yeah, you do it once, but you're going with a tractor. So maybe you go down like 50 centimeters, 60, you're plowing that. Some people do it. And in some cases, it might be necessary because it's fast. But there are other ways, slower. I am all for applying slow solutions. What you do with plowing, you can do it with plants. Of course, the plowing can do it in 1 hour. With plants, you might need a couple of years.
Can I say something?
Yes.
I know that when you plow, maybe it's 30, 40, 50 centimeters.
That's what I want to say. Exactly.
You create more compaction.
More compaction.
So it's useless.
That's exactly what I want to say. So you're plowing this, and it's fluffy, and then there is 2 tons going there. It's a tractor, a huge tractor, compacting the soil underneath. So it's cement underneath. It's as they call it, a pan. And plants cannot penetrate that. Fungi cannot penetrate that either. So it will take afterwards decades to reverse that thing. There are many plants that are borers. They are actually plows of the earth. But at the same time, they're plowing down and they're bringing a lot of carbohydrates deep down the earth, while other things are feeding them, and because they're supporting life down there. If there is a plant that has 2 meters deep roots, it's breaking down the soil down there, and at the same time it can support life down there. It can bring the carbohydrates, and fungi can grow on it, mining for minerals really, really deep down, giving it to the plant, and the plant is taking them up on their leaves. The leaves, you cut them, chop and drop, and you bring essentially all these minerals from down there on top. So they're workers, they are tools, all these plants. There are many, many examples, yes?
A question connected to the compaction for reality now. We have a farm and we have a wheel loader.
A what?
The wheel loader, that's like the truck where you can lift like pallets that can take like 1 ton of weight.
Okay,
to
yeah.
And it also has like a shovel. This can like 600 liters of compost at 1 drop, for example, like this. It is helping a lot with managing the land, managing projects, I don't know, transferring 40 cubic meters of compost from there to there. What is your take on balancing? Because you drive, this machine is like 1 ton. You make pathways, you compact the soil. but it helps a lot with
So
projects.
my first question is, you said the main use of this machine is to bring compost around?
No.
What else?
Also, to mainly materials that are used for gardening, for business reasons, to drive around. on
Like
the
what?
property.
Give me specifics.
It's pellets there are stones on there. It's pellets with firewood coming from the shelter to our place for winter. Building materials for the business of my brother. We were doing some earthwork with it now. We're just 1 year there. Anything that needs to be lifted, carried away that is heavy, like we have trunks that
Okay.
are like 2 tons. I don't know, like.
But what do you do with the trunks?
With the trunks,
Yes.
well, we've moved them because we did other projects in that place.
Okay. So
Not on regular.
most of the things that I hear are point-to-point kind of transfers. Most of them. So meaning that you can have a path. It's okay to have a path as long as, which is compacted, as long as it's used only for path. At the same time, you have to properly plan it and manage it. A path should not just be white like they do here. You get in with excavator, you open a random place, the straight line between where you are and where you want to go. Okay, you have to see the slopes, you have to see the erosion that can be created there. You have to plant along the path. You have to put a lot of organic matter so that there is no erosion through this path, for example. The other thing is, so it's okay to have one specific path as long as it's well planned. All right. Other than that, the only thing that I hear that this machine can go in many places is to bring compost. For example, where does this compost come from?
We have a nice municipality project, so we can get as much compost as we want.
Which is great. Personally, I'm all for decentralization. My municipality is one of the pioneers in Greece. They are actually making compost from all the stuff of the people. But this creates a lot more management, a lot more wasted energy, in my opinion. If you start your compost, if you start syntropic farming, you will have more organic matter than you can handle. I promise you, in a couple of years, you have more than enough and you won't need compost ever again. It's okay to start with that because you want to accelerate things. In my land, I was going to pick a lot of different stuff from here and there and bring them in. But I've tried to minimize and now almost eliminate my inputs. I just get fish, that's my only input in order to fertilize. And you can make your compost, not the same amounts, but you can create organic matter without the need of bringing in compost. Also, most of the benefits of the compost you can actually have by creating compost tea, either fungal or bacterial, and just spraying. Really, with a few kilos of compost, you can have the same benefits that you would have with tons of compost, as long as you cultivate the life. Because once you have the organic matter, you have to bring in the life. The life you can bring it by spraying it. So there are ways to minimize movement, energy consumption, and also planning your compacted paths. Okay.
Thanks.
Yes?
And maybe to just add it also,
Of course.
depending on the soils, it's very good to keep in mind when you use this machine.
Absolutely. Very good point.
If it's wet clay, you will completely destroy it, but actually if the clay is dry, it's like little springs.
Yes. Absolutely. Very, very good point. Don't know when you need it and only use it when you're not creating extra compaction. Very, very nice. So, few deep-rooted plants that to break the soil, amazing workers. From comfrey and pigeon peas, alfalfa, daikon, vetiver. Vetiver is a grass. We have brought some, we'll be using this afternoon. Can go down 4 meters deep. Insane. It can stabilize slopes that are like 80 degrees. Amazing plant. It can survive from -40 to +49 degrees. It is one of these miracle plants that we should be using everywhere. Buckwheat, artichoke, horseradish, asparagus, sorrel, topinambour, the Jerusalem artichokes, groundnuts, and a lot of other plants that are also edible, and they're great workers to decompact your soil instead of using the easy but not so efficient at the end of the day solution of plowing. Then the last but not least is the proper fruiting space. Again, we go back to the same things. We see how different needs are satisfied from the same space, which is to increase your organic matter. So, minimize soil disturbance, no till, no plowing. As we've been saying now, we just came to that already because we've been discussing it. Eliminate tillage and you will allow a lot of fungal mycelium to thrive. Again, I'll go back to my place, to the olive grove. It's surrounded by olive groves that are plowed, tilled, sprayed, etc. Sprayed, fortunately, no. The last few years, they have stopped spraying all over around my place, so it's great. But you see the difference. It's insane that I have mushrooms growing under the olive trees, which is, again, you don't expect that to happen unless you have, yeah?
What is till or tilling?
It's plowing.
It's plowing, all right.
Interesting. If you plow, you won't have mushrooms. If you leave the organic matter accumulate, you don't disturb it too much, then, like in a forest, then you will have a lot more fungal life. It is a very simple rule, and you will see the difference within a couple of years. Yeah.
But how are your trees doing in comparison to your neighbors?
You should go see them. This year especially, because it's a very, very bad year for olive oil, for olive production. And especially, of course, there are many factors that affect production locally, but that's why I wouldn't compare with another place. But all around, most of the trees are quite empty. And the last couple of years, the most important thing for me, and that's a huge discussion again, the most important thing that I have almost no olive flies. They're eliminated almost from land. And I'm talking about places where right next to it, 10 meters, 20 meters away, it's full of olive fly. You know olive fly, it's the biggest pest. It's the biggest pest of olive trees. It can really decimate, and not only decimate, but also bring down the quality of olive oil that is produced by a lot. And seriously, like, we get almost no olive fly. We might get one olive here, one olive there, but like the neighbors, my neighbors that all have olive farms, you see them running around and trying to, they put traps, they spray zeolite or kaolin or whatever, they still get a lot of olive flies. Why is that? Because a healthy soil creates a healthy plant. Mycorrhiza, actually, as we will see in the next session, are the best defenders of plants. They create the substances, they create the antibiotics, they create all the pesticide repellent substances, and they protect the plants. In our land, you have a lot of species. They feed a lot of different fungal populations, and they are building up the defenses of the plant. The plant can't handle it itself as long as, like a human, if you eat bad, you don't drink well, and you're living in a sterile environment, you're going to get sick. Same thing for a plant. If you are killing all the microbes that are living on you and inside you, you're going to get sick. Same thing is true for a plant. If you give a biodiversity, you feed it well, and you water it well, and it's in a soil that is healthy, it will be healthy and strong as well.
No.
Yes?
I was going to ask if you managed to educate them, like if they see the difference and if they are curious about what you do.
If what?
Your neighbors.
Lots of coffee. Let's try to. So now we'll do a 5-minute course on syntropic farming. No, not really. I mean, really, I'll just try. I won't talk a lot about it. Maybe. What can we say in 5 minutes?
Make a session.
It won't happen, but.
It can happen in the evening. Yeah, we can do yeah, we can do separate.
Which evening?
This evening?
Maybe not tonight.
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow night. If a few people want me, we can make a session and discussion and practical kind of applications. But just to get an idea, Syntropic farming is a method of trying to see an ecosystem as a living organism. Just go to the next slide because it says it. No, go to the next one. So, I'll just read literally what I have written here, because if you understand this, you have understood, I believe, 90% of what syntropic farming is. All species that exist, as well as species that are yet to appear, or which have already disappeared but existed before, they appear or did appear in order to fulfill specific functions endowed to them. They're there for a reason. If something appears or was there before, it came for a reason. It wasn't bad luck, it wasn't a plant that we need to kill and take it out. It was there because it was actually serving the ecosystem. Life is one of the many tools that the planet Earth, which is to be seen as a macroorganism, inside of which everything is connected and interdependent. There is no fungus, plant, protozoa, algae, fish, or whatever that is living by itself. It cannot survive. Nothing can survive by itself. They're all little elements inside a big body. In our body, if you see the ecosystem as a human body, even if now I'm scientificizing something like splitting things, you cannot have a heart surviving by itself. You cannot have a liver surviving by itself. You cannot have a brain surviving by itself. They all need each other. They all have very specific, very important functions, wide spectrum of functions, but they have to be together in order to thrive. Yeah, you can probably remove your stomach and still survive, but you won't have a great time, right? And you will get sick faster. The same thing is true for planet Earth. If you're removing or killing species and different kinds of life, then you are eliminating the possibility of this species to perform its function. So everything is connected and interdependent and has created for itself the life. The life is the tool that planet has created for itself to realize its syntropic strategy of being. What is syntropy? Go up one. Just to get the way of seeing things as perspective. Syntropy is the opposite of entropy. Most probably people have done some physics, have heard about entropy. Is a tendency of the universe, of closed systems, to actually increase randomness, to spread the energy and the mass. That's in a closed system. Is a forest a closed system? What does it receive? Sunlight, water, organic matter, things can come into it. Dust is a huge thing actually. It brings a lot of nutrients. So it's not a closed system. So the planet is not a closed system either. It actually receives a lot of matter from the universe. So this thing is performing the opposite of what is happening in the universe if we see it as one system. It is actually organizing itself to support more life. So it puts order into processes, into life, and creates more space for life. And go down to there, that's one example. If we do the session this evening, we'll go a bit deeper into that. But in syntropy, we're just trying to mimic some processes of nature and order plants, mushrooms, other organisms into such a way so that we maximize the amount of organic matter we produce, we maximize the space for life. As we were saying in the beginning, you can have more plants, you have more space actually, more surface for things to grow on, and to maximize, at the end of the day, life. That's the point of, and this is one method, very, very efficient, and we can talk about it more this evening. Any contributions or questions before we go to break?
I had one question, but it's related to the question I asked before. Like, are there any studies or like about planted forest, but I mean not in a planted monoculture way, like for example food forest, and like where trees have this connection net where like just they have mycorrhiza. It means like is it obvious that then they connect to each other, the trees, or it's not necessarily?
You mean if you plant that, if you plant a forest?
Yeah.
If this is gonna happen?
Yeah, with the plant forest, like like for example syntropic or like food forest. Like
There are, and they show mainly. I mean, there are certain things you can measure again in science, right?
Yeah.
And that's again splitting things. Instead of seeing the big picture, but they're useful metrics like biomass production, like food production, like biodiversity that is coming, apart from the things that you've planted. There are studies on these things, and they see as metrics that are exploding, like when you are planning correctly a forest and you're following these kind of methods. And resilience, absolutely. That's at the end of the day, that's the main thing we're aiming for as an ecosystem, resilience, not Brazilians.
For example, these are systems like that have maybe sometimes more type of plants of trees than in a forest. For example, certain types of forest, for example, an oak forest or something like. So would, for example, like oaks connect between themselves in this kind of space if they're planted, like, or acacias between themselves, or it would be like connection?
So a lot of the mycorrhiza, I don't know if you're asking that, if I understand, but a lot of, we will talk about it in the next session, but a lot of the mycorrhiza are extremely, they have very diverse partners.
Okay.
They're really open-minded. So the same one, the same organism can sometimes be connected to an oak and then on the other side to a beech. And they can even exchange nutrients, even if they're not the same family. They're a lot more selective if it's in the same family, even actually from the same DNA. If they're descendants, they're much more generous. But in many cases, mycorrhiza can connect different species. Any other contribution before we go get some sun?